Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, thank you. I'm Gus Smith, and one of my assignments today is to welcome all of you to the Vermont Law School and to this program on investing in the new economy. It's New Economy Week. And this is the third annual New Economy Week. New Economy Week was started by the New Economy Coalition a few years ago, and is an occasion to eclipse Columbus Day and to celebrate the movement towards a new economy, about which we'll be talking today. And I'm particularly proud to be celebrating New Economy Week in Vermont because Vermont has always had the best show for New Economy Week, and we have to thank for that Marta and Chris and Eric. Where is Eric? Eric and that other Eric. Gwen is here. Okay. Oh, there she is. Hey, Gwen. How are you? Thank you all for organizing this and other events. And thanks to DLS for hosting this. We have launched at the school a New Economy Law Center. Ably led by Melissa Scanlon and dedicated to the proposition that the law at least has to keep up with the new economy concepts and maybe can lead in some areas as well. So what is property law? How does property law help promote rather than hinder the birth of a new economy and so on? And also Vermont itself as a state is going down the road very well towards a new economy, and not there yet, but we're moving. And so I think, I'm not going to try to lecture on what the new economy is, but I think it's fair to say that there's pretty broad agreement that all of the new economy forces and parts of the new economy movement and 140 organizational members of the New Economy Coalition are striving to is to change the system of a political economy that we have now, so that it is truly and honestly and constantly and routinely supportive of the needs of people, the protection of our places, and the salvation of the planet. And so within that broad framework, there are a lot of different views and visions. There are a couple of things that seem to be very important to this program, though. One is that whatever your precise vision of the new economy is, it's going to require some fundamental change in investment, in the direction of investments, the management of investments on a large scale. And we're not going to see that fundamental change unless we do what Bernie Sanders urged us to do last night, and that is to rise up in a large, mighty democratic force and have a lot more democratic control over investment decisions than we do now. So thank you all for coming, and I will turn it over to our moderator and our hosts.
Thank you, Gus. Pleasure to have you here. And welcome all. I'm Marta Cerroni. I'm the Executive Director at the Doney Institute. And there's a group of us. We have our chair, Wayne Barstead, down there, and a volunteer, Heather Shantz, and Emily Donaldson. So you'll see us around anyway. So we are based in Norwich. We are an education organization that takes a whole system approach to sustainability, environmental sustainability, and we do think that we need a new economy as a lever to actually get to the big troubles that we have in climate, in inequality, and ecosystem change. So that is part of a systems perspective, and we see in particular investments and finance as a big lever for pushing for change. I'm not going to go into so much into the details of why that is. I'd be happy to talk more about how we see that. But on a personal level, I'm also part of that transition, that question of how do I align my values with the investments. And so I'm here also with that personal interest and a lot of questions. So I'm so honored and happy to have worked on the organizing of this event with organizations and people who have made it really fun and have made it also a learning experience for me. And first of all, I would like to mention Chris Wood at Bale, Building a Local Economy, also local here, so you can talk to Chris with any questions on what he's up to. And I also was very happy to work with Eric Becker at Clean Yield Asset Management, and you can raise your hand there. And also Eric DeLucas at Slow Money Vermont. Eric is over there, and you'll hear from these folks also later in the day. And I also want to really thank the sponsors who helped us in putting the event together, who shared generosity and enthusiasm for this idea. And I'll have to read because normally I forget people. So our sponsors, we started with Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, Vermont Law School, of course, host sponsor, Vermont Community Loan Fund, Sustainable Woodstock, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, Vermonters for a New Economy, King Arthur Flower, Clean Yield Asset Management. So thank you all for being here, and also bring your questions to the table. Have fun. It's a way for us to connect on something very fundamental today. Thank you so much. And yes, thank you so much. But most of all, I want to thank Hillary. And Hillary is here, and she's the most important person today because she actually is going to run the show. And we are going to be all in her hands. And Hillary, she is the Organizational Development Specialist at Marlborough College Center for New Leadership. But I got to meet Hillary when we co-taught a class at Marlborough College this summer. And so she's a fantastic teacher, and also she is a stand-up comedian. So she runs the Moth in the Burlington area. So you'll get to enjoy all these qualities, really. Welcome, Hillary, and I hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marta, for remembering to introduce me and not putting any pressure on me at all to be funny and engaging. But I'm so happy to be here. I want to say a big thank you for the introduction and just to the organizing committee for having me and just being a part of this very important conversation that we're going to be engaging in today. They've put together a really fabulous agenda, I think, for us. We're going to have time to hear from some expert panelists, just sort of prime our thinking here about issues maybe in a new way. And then the bulk of our time together is going to be spent going into 2 deep dive conversations. So you'll pick a topic that interests you. You'll spend 40 minutes really getting into the heart of it with your colleagues, your peers, the other people in the room, really whoever showed up. You know, those excited about flip charts and cookies. I'll give you a brief overview of the agenda, and we're going to start. I'll introduce our panelists in just a moment. They're going to talk about their experience, their expertise, and their perspectives on the issue. As they're talking, I'll invite you to take notes, really think about what's piquing your interests, any comments you have, any questions, and hold on to those. When they conclude, we're going to roll right into setting up the deep dives. So we'll invite those who are leaders of the deep dive conversations to come up, tell you a little bit about who they are, what their conversation topics are, get you thinking that way. At that point, you're all going to turn to your tables, you'll introduce yourselves, and you'll have a little bit of time to, at that point, process what you've heard so far. You know, who are you, what's come up for you, what's important, what's resonating, and ultimately, what deep dive topics have we maybe omitted or looked over that would really serve the group. We'll collect any ideas that you have, things that you'd really like to get into over the course of the evening, the afternoon. And from there, we'll get right into the deep dives. So we're going to have time for those 2 40-minute conversations. We'll harvest out the good thinking from that, do a little closure activity, and then we're going to move into socializing for about an hour. So you'll be able to follow up with anyone about a conversation maybe you didn't get to have, or some links that you made during the scripted program. So it's a lot to do. Got about 4 hours. You feel like you're ready? Ready to do this, guys? All right. You'll get more enthusiastic. I have faith in you. All right, so let's pull our panelists up to the stage, and I will introduce it. Do you all want to come up? Okay, yeah. There's May. All right. So first we're going to hear from Gus Speth. And Gus is a senior fellow at the Vermont Law School. He has served on the faculty of VLS as a professor of law from 2010 to 2015. He's also a distinguished senior fellow at Demos, the associate fellow at the TELUS Institute, and senior fellow at the Democracy Collaborative, where he's the co-chair of the Next System project. He was the dean of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies for 10 years, administrator of the United Nations Development Program, and chair of the UN Development Group. He's founder and president of the World Resources Institute, professor of law at Georgetown University, chairman of the U.S. Council on Environmental Quality. Gus, where do you have the time? And senior attorney and co-founder of the Natural Resources Defense Council. He's the author, co-author, or editor of 7 books, including his most recent, America the Possible, Manifesto for a New Economy in 2012, and the memoir, Angels by the River for Chelsea Green. So hello, Gus, and welcome. Maeve McBride. Maeve is the coordinator of 350 Vermont. She works on soup to nuts, grassroots organizing, event planning, outreach, fundraising, and operations. Maeve's academic background is in river sciences and engineering, and she completed a PhD in civil and environmental engineering at UVM. Although she is still involved with river projects in the Northeast, she is a devoted mom, climate activist, yoga teacher, gardener, and bike commuter. So welcome, Maeve. And our final panelist is Janice St. Onge. And Janice is the president of the VSJF Flexible Capital Fund, L3C, the Flex Fund, and deputy director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. I could have said that in a different order. No. The Flex Fund provides high-risk, near-equity capital and technical assistance to Vermont's natural resource businesses. Janice brings over 25 years of economic development and financial expertise to the Flex Fund and VSJF, having served in the technology and baking industries, higher education, and state government sectors during her career. Janice is Janice is a graduate of the University of Utah with a BA in marketing. She serves on the advisory board of the Vermont Small Business Development Center, executive committee of Slow Money Vermont, the Energy Action Network Capital Mobilization Group, and is a member of the State of Vermont Community Economic Development Strategy Committee. Janice is from Stowe, Vermont, and is the co-founder of the Stowe Energy and Climate Action Network, and former International Ski Federation World Cup freestyle skiing judge. Janice, all of your things are so long. Welcome to the panel. So we're going to get it kicked off here with Gus to share his experience and his perspectives, and I'll hand it over to you now, Gus.
Thank you. I guess my assignment is to begin at the very general level, since I don't know anything particular. But these people do, and they're going to tell us some good things, and other panels and other participants are as well. It's really hard to imagine the sorry state of money and finance and investment in our country. Money is a system of power, and the big banks, by and large, wield that power. The banks make money. I don't mean their profits, which are significant, but the fact that they really create almost all the money that we operate with in society through the making of loans and the creation of debt. And almost all of this money, hundreds of trillions of dollars of it globally, is in search of high financial returns. And very little of it is in search of high environmental or social returns. And therein lies the fundamental problem, I think. If I were to offer, and I will, sort of a plan or an agenda for dealing with this broad problem, I would run something like the following. Not too well thought out, but so let's start with Bernie and break up the big banks. Beyond that, I think it would be important not just to break them up, but to do two other things to them. One is to have the public take a large share in the ownership and through that the management of the banks. And secondly is to insist on a model of management that involved not only employees but all the stakeholders. So we would move to stakeholder-dominated boards and not shareholder and management-dominated boards. Secondly, I followed again the tips from the debate last night. We should go back to Glass-Steagall or find other ways, maybe more modern ways, to separate commercial banking from casino banking. Thirdly, we should find multiple ways to revitalize and fund well community-based financial institutions, banks, savings and loans, community investment development funds, and other local institutions that are locally rooted, and that should be the primary source of primary activity, primary banking activity in the country. It's kind of like going back to the boring 50s. The fourth thing I would recommend would be to go to the point where every state had a state bank. And we know from the work that Gwen and Marta and others have done that Vermont could get there pretty quickly if it wanted to. The list of funds that Vermont already has is considerable, and to consolidate them and create the ability to close the gaps and to fund these things well would be a wonderful thing. We should create some national special purpose banks, like the National Infrastructure Bank, and run it as a public utility. We need a system of multiple currencies, of alternative currencies, don't we, Gwen? An ecology of currencies that Gwen can tell you a lot more about. And the most far-reaching thing, if we could ever get there, it would be what's now being called the New Chicago Plan, based on the old Chicago plan of requiring 100% reserve requirements for banks. So you can only lend what you have. And what that means is that as part of that, the business of making money and spending it into the economy would revert back to government, where it ought to be. And I don't mean central banks either. This sounds, and probably for most people is, a totally off-the-wall idea, but along comes Martin Wolf, the chief economic columnist for the Financial Times, and starts writing editorials in favor of it, the columns. And the IMF issues a report on the new Chicago plan. So this doesn't have a lot of legs, but it has some legs, and I think it's well worth beginning to push the idea and to make it part of an agenda of this type. More concretely and down to earth, I sort of am a big proponent of the divest, invest movement. I don't have much money, but what I do have is not in fossil fuels at this point. And we ought to all be pressing the institutions that we are part of to divest, and pressing very hard, I think. The school here and others are promoting what's going to be probably, let's back up a sec, what's probably going to be one of the biggest industrial transformation in the country in the years ahead is going to be the shift to renewable energy in our energy sector. And is that going to be done by the same old people who run the energy businesses so far? Or is it going to be done in a more community-oriented way? And how do we take community power to scale and have really locally owned and locally financed business enterprises producing our power? So I think this renewables transition is huge and hugely important, and there are a lot of other areas of local investment which we can all participate in and promote and maybe finance. So those are some of the things that are on my mind, and as I've said at the outset, though, I don't think any of this is likely to happen, at least on a scale that really makes a difference, unless we do exactly what Bernie says, and that's all come together, as many of us as possible. The progressive communities get out of their silos and start forming a common campaign to take back America, to take back our democracy, and we need that first and foremost, I think. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gus. Next up, we have Maeve, and Maeve is going to discuss why to divest and some highlights from her work happening with divestment at 350 Vermont. The technology is going to work. There we go.
Great. So, hi everyone. I really like visuals, so I wanted to bring some slides to share with you today. And I wanted to start with this one because even though I work with 350 Vermont, which is the state affiliate of 350.org, I don't talk to Bill McKibben on a day-to-day basis, but this weekend he actually sent me an email, and he said, I have not been as livid as I am today, I don't think, in my 28 years of doing this. And he was responding to this article in the LA Times. And he was, so this is the cover of Sunday's paper, exposing that Exxon has known for decades that climate change is a problem, and they've known about it. They've been using, in fact, the same models developed by NASA that their publicity people like to knock down in the press and say that they're worth crap and they're not predicting well. So so our job at this point, I think, is to really raise awareness about this, that this is criminal behavior, and that we need to divest and we need to prosecute. And I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an economist, but I'm going to say that with lots of force. We need to divest and prosecute these folks because this is criminal. Another big piece of news in September is that the California legislature voted to divest their pension funds, the CalPERS and CalSTRS systems. These are the pension funds for California teachers and state employees. And divest, I should clarify, from coal interests at this point. And that is a huge amount of money, and that's the first public pension fund that is taking that step. So really exciting news. I want to go back just for some of you who may not be as familiar with the divestment movement. Is there anyone who considers themselves not so familiar with the divestment movement? Okay, oh, so most of you are, great. Well, then I'll just go through this more quickly. Divestment from fossil fuel corporations has been something that actually started in Swarthmore, I believe, but it was in 2013 that Bill McKibben wrote his piece in the Rolling Stone, and launched this campaign of 350.org with the Do the Math tour. And what he was really exposing and trying to air is that there are an enormous amount of fossil fuel reserves, of course, and we have to keep 4/5 of those in the ground if we're going to maintain anything near a stable climate. So therein is the basis for divestment. I also probably don't need to explain to you how divestment works, but I think we could read through this, but the big takeaway, right, is that we have never thought that divestment was going to really affect fossil fuel corporations in their pocketbook. This campaign is about damaging their political capital and their social capital. And that is surely working. I think the other big point, or one of the big reasons that we've taken on this campaign is because this is a way that students, that young people can have agency in outside of the political system, which seems so intractable at this point. So this is just showing you all of the dots of all the student-run divestment campaigns, of which I know there are students here that kind of got their start in this area working on divestment. So these are students working at their campuses trying to influence their administrations to take this step of divestment. And I want to point you to two resources actually that you might not be aware of. And I'm not going to try to bring up the websites and fiddle with the technology, but one is, if you want to write these down, Money Trees. If you Google Money Trees and divestment, this is a student-led initiative this summer where they did a study group on divestment and reinvestment. And it's a really great set of resources, videos, documents that I think are really great, that this community would really appreciate. The other one is, has anyone heard of this group called Regenerative Finance? Probably Gus knows about it. Great. That was another one that these students had in their study group, and they have a really great set of guiding principles around investment that I think takes this idea of local investing and investing for a just world even a step further, to bring in even more of the social justice issues. So I'm excited to do more with that. I wanted to just go through quickly some of the commitments to divestment we've seen here in Vermont. 3 of our colleges here have divested. We have several more campaigns going on in the state. We've also seen groups like Sun Common take the step of divesting their retirement funds, which is a little bit risky, I think. Certainly, when I talked to Dwayne about it, it was a step that most of them were on board with divestment, but it was a different kind of a hurdle in divesting that sort of a retirement fund. And then I don't want to put Eric on the spot here, but I love this photo. This was at Vermont Digger, and so I wanted to segue here and to talk about, this is in a committee room, this is in the Senate Government Operations Committee room, where we have a live bill to divest the state pension fund. And Eric was delivering testimony here, and to his left is a young student from Vermont Common School who did dynamic testimony that day too. But I just, the cluster of faces there is just too unreal. So we're trying to do what California has done and divest this Vermont state pension, and we have definitely hit quite a big obstacle with Treasurer Pierce. Now, I like Beth a lot, and she is doing great things for our teachers and our state employees, but this is one issue that she believes that she can engage with the corporate criminals of ExxonMobil, and I choose to disagree. So we've been pressuring in two ways here in Vermont. There are two ways that the state pension could get divested. That's either through the legislature or through a 7-member body that's the Vermont Pension Investment Committee. So that's them there sitting at that conference table. And this is back in July when we had a big public showing, and many of you were there. I know some of you were there. And we're asking them just to take the initial step of divesting from coal. And at this meeting, they said, we will not divest in whole or in part, period, end of story. So that's where that group is right now. Not a terribly hopeful place, but we're still working on them. So maybe some of you have sat in on some of these fossil fuel shareholder meetings, maybe. This was my first experience. So Beth Pierce went down to Texas in May and went to the ExxonMobil meeting to do her shareholder engagement, her shareholder advocacy. And she she spoke for a greenhouse gas cap resolution that's been put in front of the Exxon board for decades. This was their opening slide. And these are the mountains of Papua New Guinea. And I tell you, I could barely stomach sitting into this whole meeting. They have, no bones about it, the death plan for the planet. It's patting ourselves on the back because we are extracting fossil fuels in the most dangerous, risky places there are in the world. So really disheartening. And the shareholder resolution that Beth traveled all those many miles to promote got a minor 9.6% of the shareholder vote or something like that. So I want to segue to, tried to talk a little bit about the moral side of divestment, right? But there's actually really the economic side too. This is just showing some performance of the fossil fuel free index compared to the S&P 500 over the last 10 years. And it's hard to see on this graph and with this light, but the fossil free index actually does better in the last year and a half or so, and it keeps pace the rest of the 10 years. And this is not my slide, and I'm not an economist, can't speak to this very well, but I think that is hugely important. And the other thing that we're capitalizing in this moment is the fact that the fossil fuel industry is doing so poorly, and we can demonstrate that pension funds are losing a lot of money and have lost a lot of money in the last year because of this. So there you have it, Massachusetts pension losing so much. And we'll have those numbers for Vermont hopefully within the month. Finally, I wanted to end with a slide that shows a little bit more about what 350 is about. Our theory of change is that we need to dismantle the social license of the fossil fuel industry by shifting public opinion and damaging those companies, their economic and political power. And just recently, I don't know if anyone got over to the climate revival that was held in Middlebury, but there was a great speaker there, Reverend Jim Antal, and he made it clear that he thinks there are two things we need to do at this moment of crisis, and that is divestment and civil disobedience. And that's what we're doing at 350. So I implore you all to do both of those things yourselves, and to consider joining us. We have a table outside, and you can sign up there and that sort of thing. Not to do too much promotion, but yeah, so I think, and this is just a lovely, cute little banner that's nice to end with. Thanks.
Thank you, Maeve, for your advocacy and that information. Next up, we're going to hear from our final panelist. We have Janice St. Onge, and she's going to be talking about Vermont solutions and an example of how VSJF works to fund untraditional businesses here.
So thanks for having me. I apologize, I've got a little bit of a cold going on, so if I cough, please, I'm trying not to get anybody sick in the room here. But I guess my role at this point is to kind of set the stage for your next series of conversations. I'm going to bring it down a little bit, until things happen like what Gus has described. There are actually some things that you can do right here today in Vermont to put your dollars local and have an impact. And I guess what I would say is, to start, is that there's many ways to get engaged based on your own personal risk profile, your financial capacity, and what you want to accomplish. So I think what I wanted to do is start with a few questions that I would ask myself if I was looking to invest local. And I would start with, does the investment align with my own personal values? I think for most of us in this room, that's probably where we would all start, is alignment with values. Do I have the financial resources to support an investment, and at what level? So here I want to bring in this concept of accredited versus non-accredited investors. How many folks in the room know what an accredited investor is? Okay, so for folks who don't, I'm just going to briefly describe it because it's a term that the Internal Revenue Service defines pretty succinctly, but that differentiation for a Main Street investor of someone who has, I guess that would be most of us in this room probably, versus someone who is a person of wealth, is a distinction in how we can actually invest directly in businesses. So an accredited investor includes anyone who has an earned income that exceeded $200,000 or $300,000 with a spouse in each of the prior 2 years, and reasonably expects the same for the current year, and has a net worth of over $1 million, either alone or together with a spouse, and that does not include your primary residence. So the reason I bring that up is because there are certain rules and regulations that tell you, as an investor, an accredited investor, what you can and cannot invest in. So, and that'll come up later in a few minutes as I talk a little bit about what kind of things we can do right here in Vermont today. The other thing I would say is I would ask myself, how much risk am I willing to take, and what am I willing to take for reward for that risk? So that's the concept of risk and reward. And time, how much time do I have to evaluate and then manage a portfolio of investments? And is this really what I want to do with my time? And then lastly, do I have the expertise to evaluate an investment opportunity, to do what we would call in my vernacular, due diligence? Do I know what to look for in a business, a management team? Do they have competence? Do I know how to evaluate financial viability and industry opportunities? So that's kind of setting the stage for first understanding what kinds of things I might want to invest in based on all of these questions that we just talked about. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of investment structures that you can do here in Vermont. And it's not just the standard vanilla anymore. You can invest in a business by giving them a loan, which is where you get a set repayment of principal and interest back over a period of time. You can provide a donation. You can invest in an instrument called Convertible Debt. And that's become kind of the new type of near equity investment that a lot of businesses are looking to raise capital through, whereby it's essentially debt, but that the repayment is deferred for some period of time with the option to convert to equity down the road. You can provide a royalty loan where it's debt, but you get repaid based on a percentage of revenue, and that's the type of loans that we provide at the Flexible Capital Fund. And you can also invest with equity, where you actually own a piece of the company, and you oftentimes have an opportunity to play a role in decision making. And the other thing that is less talked about is investing locally by providing a guarantee for a business or cash collateral to help them leverage more traditional funds. And before I move on, I just want to say that it's really important, if we are looking at investing locally in businesses, to ensure that that business gets the right kind of instrument, that right kind of structure for the stage of growth and the scale that they want to grow into. Because oftentimes I've seen it where a business has gotten a loan and what they needed was equity, and ultimately it killed them. Or they got equity and what they really needed was a loan because they didn't need that other decision-making folks in play. So understanding what kind of structure or investment that you're looking to invest in a business is really, really important. So here's the down and dirty though. This is what I think you're looking for, is what are some ways I can invest in Vermont? Well, how many people shop at their local co-op? How many people are part of a CSA? How many people buy from the farm down the road? Okay, so pretty much everybody, we are all investing locally, right here, right now. We're doing it already, okay? Every time that you buy local goods from your local store or farmer's market or producer, we make choices in how we invest our dollars. So we're all doing it already, so that's number one. The other way is you can invest your time, energy, and talents in a local business. Become a mentor. I can't underscore enough how very, very important it is that these growing and emerging businesses have good advisory capacity, because it's not just about the money, it's what comes with the money that really counts and helps these companies be successful. Other ways, if you want to kind of get your toe in the water, investing in a revolving loan fund, or what we would call an intermediary, like the Vermont Community Loan Fund, Community Capital of Vermont, or your local credit union. This is a really good option for folks who aren't accredited investors, who really want to put their money in a place that already is doing the work for them, that is spreading their risk across a number of different companies. Accredited investors, for those folks who are considered that higher net worth, can look for opportunities to invest in higher risk and presumably higher reward. Now, I'm not saying that always happens. Alternative intermediaries. The Flexible Capital Fund, the organization that I work for, we had an offering of equity for accredited investors in Vermont and outside of Vermont up until December 31st. So we're no longer taking investment, but stay tuned, because down the road we may open a second fund. But there may be an opportunity to invest in an intermediary like us, who's doing high-risk debt, and to help growing companies in Vermont stay and be successful here. There's Fresh Source Capital, which is a New England fund focused on food system businesses that has an offering open. So they're an investment fund doing similar type of investments, not just in Vermont, but New England-wide. And they're partnering with folks like us to ensure that deals can happen. There's Fresh Tracks Capital, which is the state's only venture capital fund, which is really high risk and presumably higher reward. They're on their third fund right now in investing. Karen Cross is the managing partner there, and they, again, the advantage of an intermediary or a fund like the three I just named is that the folks there are professionals. They have the expertise to understand how to evaluate investment opportunities. They have the ability to manage investments post-closing, and they can spread your money across a number of companies. And I can't emphasize enough, when we talk about folks wanting to invest directly in businesses, once you sign that check, typically there's going to be some hands-on there. So understanding that whole, how much time do I have, how much risk do I want to take in investing is a really important component. If you invest in more than one or two businesses directly, you're going to have some post-closing opportunities, and it's going to take some time. Other ways you can invest, you can donate to a community foundation or a nonprofit that is investing in our local businesses and is in alignment with your values. So in Vermont, we have the Vermont Community Foundation. That has many different donor-managed funds and opportunities to support local businesses. We have the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, which is the other hat that I wear, a nonprofit that does a lot of technical assistance with businesses and natural resource companies in the state. Vermont Land Trust, for example, is another organization that does work with small farmers and producers and helping them get access to land. I want to mention investment clubs and networks, which you're going to hear a little bit about next. We do have a formal angel network in the state of Vermont called the North Country Angel Investors, and that is for accredited investors only. So again, that's understanding that subset of investment criteria, but they meet on a monthly basis, and they will review deals on a revolving basis as well. Investment clubs. So you'll hear from the White River Investment Club, and they're often formed as an LLC and allow a group of investors to pool their funds for investment in small community businesses. Investment networks. So we have one launching here, the Vermont Food Investors Network, that Eric's going to speak about. And that really serves to provide a mechanism to help Main Street investors network with entrepreneurs seeking capital. It's not whereby they're going to, the Food Investors Network doesn't invest directly, but rather they serve as a matchmaking service. You can invest direct in a business, and as you may imagine, this is probably one of the most risky things you can do. We do it professionally, and it's still pretty risky. But let me tell you, investing directly in a business, it's a team sport, truly. You're getting into a long-term relationship with an entrepreneur, and you need to know their strengths and weaknesses. Going direct brings its own risks and rewards, and I would highly recommend, if that's a route you want to take, that you really partner with someone who can properly evaluate the business and the entrepreneur. And you need to know what's involved. We have today Chris Smith. Where's Christopher Smith is here from the Department of Financial Regulation. I wanted to bring up that department because they're doing great things in helping Vermont small businesses gain access to the Main Street investor through what's known as the Vermont Small Business Offering Exemption. Are folks familiar with that? How many people have heard the VSBO? So briefly, I will tell you that this allows this new regulation, what's been in place, let's say, for a long time. It recently got a facelift, I guess I would say, from the legislature and with the help of the folks at the Department of Financial Regulation to make it easier for companies, small businesses in the state to raise capital from their own community. So it allows Vermont businesses and startup companies to raise up to $2 million in capital by selling shares in their company to in-state investors. And it allows for a simplified process. And it also allows the company, if they're registered with the state, to advertise, which is an interesting twist. VSBO gives all Vermonters the opportunity to support local entrepreneurs existing in small businesses. So you as a potential investor, Main Street investor, if you're looking at a company that is registered under the Vermont Small Business Offering Exemption, could potentially invest in that business. So I think you just need to understand what that entails, and there's the Department of Financial Regulation has a great website you can go to. You can talk to Christopher Smith and his colleague Michael Pichak, but making it a lot easier. It's, I guess, as you refer to it, Christopher, it's Vermont's crowdfunding law, so to speak, because it allows small businesses to raise, a minimum of $10,000 at a pop, which is a lot better than having to go out and raise $100,000 or $200,000. You can invest in a crowdfunding campaign of a local business. Typically in the past it's been pre-buys and donations, but now there's debt and equity opportunities through what's happening both in Vermont and nationwide. A couple of options in Vermont. So Kiva Zip, which is supported by the Addison County Economic Development Corporation, is now up and running. It's an offshoot of Kiva, which is a national and international crowdfunding site. Milk Money folks, the Milk Money folks are here and they're getting launched with their business. Janice and her partner, want to raise your hand, Louisa? It's a newly formed crowdfunding site that's working directly with the Department of Financial Regulation to help investors and entrepreneurs get together. Design Book is another place, another crowdfunding site that's launched in Vermont. And then the other piece is you look at Eric Becker and talk to your money or asset manager about to see if they offer alternative investment options. There's self-managed or self-directed IRAs out there. So a lot of ways you can get involved now. And the last thing wouldn't be worth my weight in gold if I didn't tell you where to find the deals, right? So get involved in networks. So you're going to hear from Slow Money Network. Eric DeLuca is going to talk about what that network is doing in the farm and food system side of things. And that's an emerging network that connects investors with people that are building local and regional food systems. You can participate in the Vermont Food Investors Network. You can come to matchmaking events. Coming up on October 24th is the Financing the Working Landscape event up at Sterling College. And so those are venues that are really tailored towards entrepreneurs linking up with investors. You can connect through these emerging crowdfunding portals that we just talked about, like Milk Money and Design Book. You can get involved in organizations like Startup VT and Launch VT. How many people have heard of those two organizations? Couple. So those are organizations outside of maybe the realm of mission-based related investing, but they are working with truly startup and emerging businesses of all kinds across the way, and they have all kinds of networking events that happen typically on a monthly basis. Talk to your local chamber or regional development corporations about any interesting emerging companies that they're seeing. Talk to your local bankers. Connect with leaders of local intermediaries like us to find out what we're investing in and where there might be opportunity to co-invest. We've done 2 investments now where we've sold or participated out a portion of our loans to individual investors who were interested in the structure that we were using, although we use royalty financing or revenue share financing to help businesses grow. So we love to have other people in the deal because it makes it better for the entrepreneur. So I guess in the end, I just want to reiterate our goal, and it should be, it's really about helping that business find the right match of capital for the stage of growth that they're in and the market that they're selling into and the scale they want to grow to. So with that, I'm going to be finished.
Thank you, Janet. So important to remember that there are simple ways like taking your life into your own hands in the city market parking lot to invest in your local economy. All right, let's give a big round of applause to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for setting the stage for our talk. And now I'd like to invite, just hold your questions, hold your thoughts and comments. We're going to get to the open space discussion as quickly as possible. I'd like to just invite up the leaders of our deep dive conversations that we've got planned. They're going to give you a quick pitch, introduce who they are, what their topic is, and why you should join them in about 1 to 2 minutes here. So, and some of you have technology, so why don't we start with the folks who do not have technology? And if you want to line up right here so I can see you, that'd be great. All right, and Eric, do you want to kick us off?
Hi, thanks for coming, folks. Slow Money Vermont is really excited to be a sponsor of this event. As the Pope said in Philadelphia, we're here because you're here. We really see an opportunity for everybody to be involved as an investor in ways that they feel comfortable with in the local food system. And as Janice pointed out, that can range from buying food at your local food co-op or in your local CSA, and then it can get more impactful as you go on. And that's the conversation that we're having with folks statewide. We do it 3 ways. We do it through convenings and partnerships like today, and like the Financing the Working Landscape event on Saturday, October 24th at Sterling College. And we do it through communications. We work really hard to help get the word out and help people understand, both investors and entrepreneurs, what are we talking about, how does it work, how can we build relationships, how can we level the playing field. And then we do it through creating ways for folks to actually get together and meet each other and even potentially do deals. And Eric Becker from our team is going to talk a little bit more about the Vermont Food Investors Network, and that's one of the most concrete ways that we help investors and entrepreneurs find each other. Yeah. Come visit me if you want to learn more about Slow Money Vermont and what Slow Money is doing all around the country. We're just one network among many that are bringing together local food investors and local food entrepreneurs.
Hi, Eric Becker with Clean Yield Asset Management and Vermont Food Investors Network. And I don't have any way to get back at Maeve for sticking me up there, but at the moment. But I will be at a table along with the folks from Milk Money, Louisa and Janice, to talk about what the Vermont Food Investors Network is, how we plan on collaborating with Milk Money to connect entrepreneurs to investors on an ongoing basis, really focused on using the VSBO regulation that Janice St. Ange just talked about. And so if you want to get more details on how to get involved and what that process is going to look like, we'd love to have you participate in our discussion too.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Jake Ide with the Vermont Community Loan Fund. And the loan fund is a nonprofit alternative lender. Janice talked about our work a little bit. We are the oldest and largest community development loan fund in Vermont. And to my knowledge, while Community Capital Vermont is another great organization that's doing wonderful work, making microloans and providing a lot of technical assistance to small businesses, individuals, regular folks like us can't invest in community cap in the way that they can invest in the loan fund. We have investments from both non-accredited and accredited investors. Our traditional instrument folks invest a minimum of $1,000. We have relationships that are much higher than that, well over $1 million with some individuals and families, and a number of other businesses and foundations and lots of faith-based groups actually were important in starting our industry. So the Loan Fund is a nonprofit. We're a kind of a subset of nonprofits and organizations called Community Development Financial Institutions, which are doing great work all around the country. There's revolving loan funds like us, there's Community Development Venture Cap, there's Community Development Credit Unions like Opportunities Credit Union up in Burlington. So if you'd like to come learn more about what the Loan Fund is doing and what we're investing in, we have 4 programs, 4 core programs. We started out as a lender for affordable housing development, not single family stuff, but larger community development done by the local land trusts. We do a lot of lending at this point. The second largest part of our portfolio is around small businesses. We've done a lot of small farms and food related businesses. We actually launched a fund this year to focus specifically on that. That's doing a lot of great work, a lot more great work than we thought it was going to do so quickly, but it's great news. We also provide a lot of capital to other nonprofits in Vermont, and specifically have a niche program specifically for childcare and early care and education businesses and organizations in Vermont. So if you'd like to learn more about what the Loan Fund is doing, the ways that we're helping folks put their money to work here in Vermont, also earning them a financial return, while they're getting a social return or a community return right here at home, or if you'd like to learn more about what other CDFIs are doing nationally and internationally, we can talk about that as well. Thanks.
Okay, I'm the guy with the technology. Hi, I'm Steve Aldrich. I'm the president and founder of the White River Investment Club. I'm also the chairman of BAIL. And the White River Investment Club is just a group of local people from the area who have gotten together to democratically decide how to invest their pooled investments, or their pooled monies that they have available for investment. Our vision is to build a better future through investing locally, and our mission is to enable our members to make local investments which help themselves and their communities. So it's a pretty simple, straight-ahead idea. To become a member requires a minimum of $1,000 for you to put forward an investment. There's no upper limit. The club is run democratically by the members. One member, one vote. We currently have about 17 members. There's some of those are couples, but they get 2 votes because they put in at least $2,000. And you need 2/3. You can have up to 100 members, and we can manage up to $25 million. In our operating agreement, we've required that any investment receive an approval vote of at least 2/3 of the members. I know you can't read this slide from the back of the room. It's not important that you read it. I just want to mention the kinds of values that we are considering in making our investments. Of course, we consider return and we consider risk, but we also consider the local character of the investment, the local social impact that investment will have, the environmental effect, and the local economic impact. And just to give you a sense of what a home run would be for us, I think a home run in an investment would be a 5% or greater expected annual rate of return, a less than 5% chance of failure to perform as expected, the investment being located within and principally serving the White River Valley, an investment that directly addresses multiple social problems or needs, an investment that has a potentially transformative effect for a major environmental challenge, and an investment that directly creates 3 or more local jobs and will have strong local multiplier effects. So that kind of thing is a home run for us, and I hope that you'll come visit us, but if you're going to something else and you're still interested, don't hesitate to take my contact information and get in touch. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm batting cleanup, I guess. My name is Gwendolyn Hall-Smith, and I'm with Vermonters for a New Economy, which is a small nonprofit organization dedicated to all the stuff we've been talking about. And I've just finished a book with Michael Schuman called Vermont Dollars, Vermont Cents, that has a write-up of just about everything you've heard about today and more. So if you're interested in the written version of all these presentations, a lot of it is covered in the book, and it's available for free online as well. It's published by the Post-Carbon Institute as part of their divestment campaign. So we're looking for ways to take money out of Wall Street and return it to Main Street. Milk money's in there, the White River Investment Club is in there, the Vermont Community Loan Fund is in there, and it's a book that tells you how investors and businesses and financial professionals and stakeholders and even public institutions can help move that money from Wall Street to Main Street. It also describes the effort we made in Vermont a couple years ago to start a public bank and what has happened with that effort, which is the 10% for Vermont program. And personally, I'm interested in the nature of money and finance. I serve on the board of the Onion River Exchange, which is a time bank in central Vermont that uses time instead of money for exchanges, helps raise the standard of living for people in our region without jeopardizing their federal benefits or their state benefits, because it doesn't count as income. And I'm interested, as Gus described earlier, in a variety of ways to change our monetary system. So if you join me at the table, I'm sitting over here, I'm happy to talk about any of those subjects, whatever the table decides to do. Thanks very much.
Okay, so you've heard from our panelists, you've heard from the deep dive discussions that we've got planned. I'm sure that there are a lot of other discussion topics floating around out there. So now you've got 20 minutes. We invite you to turn to your table mates. If you're at a particularly small table, why don't you come forward and join in on a larger table. Introduce yourself. You can either share your own personal story about divestment, investment, or the new economy, or share something that resonated with you, or maybe a question you had about what you've heard here today. And once you've swung around and you've all introduced yourself, move into a conversation about what additional deep dive topics you might like to see. And if you have one as a table you'd like, pick a captain that can come up here, introduce it, and then lead the discussion or hold the space for that. So we will go into the debrief right now. And to start with, before we get your deep dive topics, we'd love to hear if at your table you had any, as Marta said, burning reactions, which I thought sounded like a medical diagnosis. But any insights, anything that came up at your tables? Just raise your hand, we'll popcorn it out.
One of the things that we discovered was how much commonality there was in the discussion at our table, and the idea that we're not trying to convince the whole world that there needs to be change, but actually just a small chunk of it. And it's those people who are sort of on the fence. I think we've all felt that sensation of I've got to do something else. The world isn't working the way I want it to, and what is it that I can do to make a difference? So that's one of the things that we talked about. Was there anything else that you wanted to bring up? There? That's good.
Thanks, Bob. Any other groups? Gwen?
Yeah, on the topic of what we all had in common, there was a lot of people at this table who were really interested in how to move their retirement funds, those funds that are behind the 401k kind of shield and IRAs into local investment.
Great, thank you.
Yes, I manage the investments for a charitable trust, a small charitable trust. And one of the problems we have is that we're required by IRS to spend on gifts and operating costs at least 5% of our investments every year, and regardless of the return. And so, you know, an objective here is that we really need to have that 5%, and we need to have more to recover these years where we have losses like we've had in the past. So that creates a problem in decision-making about where to invest.
Great, thanks, Ed. And I think we've got time for one more. Anybody else? Emily, we'll bring you a mic.
There's a lot of discussion at our table just about local investment and local dollars like the Berkshires. And I think some examples of what's been happening in Montpelier. I don't know if those local dollars are still working, but just trying to understand like how towns like Hardwick have become so much of a thriving community, what their story is, and how we could emulate that in other local areas. That's where we were really diving into things the other day.
Great, thank you. That microphone sounds like it's attached to some sort of alien ship, so we'll use this one moving forward. Okay, thank you for sharing those. And were there any additional topics that came up for deep dives that we don't have listed here? And just to reiterate, we've got Eric, who's going to be hosting a talk on Slow Money Vermont, another Eric talking about Food Investors Network, Jake, who's going to be talking about the Vermont Community Loan Fund, Steve with the White River Investment Club, Gwen with Vermont Dollars and Vermont Cents, and anything else that comes up. And then we have added Janice St. Ange, who's going to be talking about the Flex Fund and hosting that conversation. So was there anything else at the table that someone felt really compelled they want to host an additional deep dive? And Marta will capture it up here.
I'm Dee Dee Purshouse of the Soil Carbon Coalition, and this is Carl Tiedemann from Soil for Climate. And we'd like to host a table about investing in soil and how do you know that your investment in a farm or soil restoration is actually having the impact that it should. So.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else have a topic? Okay, going once. Going twice.
All right.
Oh, you got one over here. Great.
I came late, so I don't really know, but the reason I came was 2 years ago. Do I need this?
Yes.
Yes. 2 years ago, I went to a meeting at Montreux Museum. Margaret Cheney and Bob Walker had just come back from Germany. And they were talking about, because of some of the structural advantages that Germany has in terms of a national cooperative bank and stuff, that whenever a solar project was going into a community, local people, whether they had $50 or 500 or 5,000 or 50,000, could invest, and typically we're getting that 12 to 20% return on investment. And I've seen a lot of movement. I think it's incredible the last 2 years what the cost per watt is going down here, but we're starting to have pushback in terms of there's, we put in a very tiny 4.4 kilowatt for our house in the studio, and now we're talking with all earth renewable doing a larger project. But I think that it would be really useful if instead of the way that the business plans are structured now, you have to have an investor who's got a huge federal tax appetite to suck up, because they could be putting up for a 500 kilowatt project $2 to $2.4 million, and they get their profit back immediately from the tax credit, which on a project like that would be $800,000-900,000, and the sale of the renewable energy credits. So how do we break out of that and into a point where we could have local people funding local solar projects in a way that you don't have to keep your retirement fund in Wall Street. So that's my version.
Great, so I think that makes an awesome deep dive topic. And Mark is capturing it up there.
Can we have a name?
And what, yeah, what's your name?
John Fago.
This is John.
And I'm just today to speak about
Community solar. Sorry, John Fago, solar. Community solar.
Let's be careful about that term, community solar, because things sold, community solar.
We're getting into the deep dive already over here. It's a great topic. And what was your name? And Dee Dee for number 7. D-I-D-I. Okay, and did I miss anybody else?
So, Slow Money got started with seeing what was happening in the slow food movement and how much people could start to rally in large numbers around caring about some basic things that represented a cultural shift, and that brought people more into a grounded relationship with both the land and their communities. And so Slow Money emerged from that, and it had been talked about for a while through terms like patient capital, but really bringing money back down to earth. And part of that is place-based. So, go ahead.
I think we're going to decouple because this is really off.
Why don't you introduce your topic?
Well, it's really about how do we change the business plan and make it so that we can develop solar projects in local communities that are based on local investment or working between the capital requirements of the projects and also the current structure of the business models that make solar energy work, which has to do with the 30% federal tax credit and in many cases the sale of renewable energy credits. But we would like to transform that in a way so that we can deal I don't speak for my own feeling is that, I get a kid and, we absolutely must be stopping our addiction to oil and carbon-based fuels. So it really is kind of a foot race to 2050 to get to a place where there's a chance for coming generations to have a shot at a livable climate.
So, well, let's consider that a pitch for this. This group is going to re-splinter again on those themes, local investment strategies for solar to win this foot race to 2050. So why don't you guys go ahead and take a table and folks can join if you're, yeah, no problem. So with that, we're back to this idea of local food businesses, how to enable regular folks to put money into local food businesses and to think about strategies for doing that. So it would be helpful to me to hear kind of thoughts and ideas that you two have, things that you've thought or done or that you care about in relation to that theme in your lives up to this point.
I'm a member of a CSA, I've been a member of food co-ops.
How about you?
I guess, what are we talking about, like investing into companies or what you just mentioned, like supporting local?
It's about engagement in local food systems and an engagement in local investment, either of those themes. And I think we'll start to see how little things that people already do actually are investments in local food businesses, even if it's not like I'm going to give you money for your business. But what has been your experience so far with local food, for example, in general?
Well, I certainly try to like I prefer to buy my vegetables at a farmer's market, and I go to a co-op for the I would say the majority of my purchases, as much as I can, not everything, but because of affordability to some degree. But that's probably, I always try to buy local when I can, and in cash if I can, so that the credit card companies don't get the percentage and the local businesses.
How about you? Engagement with local food or local investing up to this point?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I buy at the local co-ops almost exclusively. I mean, as far as the bigger amounts of purchases. Plus the farmers markets. I haven't gone to the CSA because it's just another one that I don't need to do right now. But one of the concerns I've had, if I can bring up a concern, is for the farmers who are marketing their food at, say, a farmer's market. What are their issues? And is there a way of addressing those issues, like transport? I know that farmers are there not making very much money. They're it's kind of a marginal effort, and they're putting in a lot of time and effort to sell. Are the slow money address that kind of issue?
That's a great question. Let's do other questions, and these could be questions that you have personally, like about the idea of investing in local food businesses, or you have system questions like what's up with local farmers at farmers markets, and are they making money, are they losing money? What other questions kind of?
I'd like to know what your organization does. And
what Slow Money Vermont does. Okay.
Yeah.
So Slow Money Vermont is a network, so it brings people together. And particularly, it brings together local food investors and regular folks, local food investors, so not necessarily just people with a lot of money, and local food entrepreneurs, so people that are starting or running businesses that relate to the local food economy. So in practical terms, we do things like an entrepreneur showcase we did in May in White River, where we had 5 or so local food businesses present for a few minutes on here's what we do, here's what our business is, and here's how we're expanding. And then other people in the crowd can say, gosh, I'd like to meet and get to know that business. Some folks invest all the time or are part of organizations like the Vermont Community Loan Fund. Other folks are thinking, gosh, I've got a little bit of money and I'd like to put it in local economies. How might I do that? What would I need to do? What would I need to learn? The Vermont Food Investors Network that Eric Becker is talking about is a concrete way for local food investors and local food businesses to come together and look at opportunities, and that's going to be online. And also doing face-to-face get-togethers like we're going to do on October 24th in Sterling College. And then we help get the word out about investing in local food, about opportunities like working with the Vermont Community Loan Fund, which is a very simple way for regular folks to put a small amount of money into a fund that is helping local food businesses and putting money into them, so there's a little less risk there.
Sorry, what was that?
The Vermont Community Loan Fund, which is on another table there, that's a simple way for regular folks to put, it could be $1,000 into a fund that then gets invested into local food businesses, and the risk is relatively low to the investor. It's diversified across a bunch of different businesses. Does that make sense in terms of what Slow Money Vermont is, or do you have other questions?
I think so. Can you just review what's the difference between Slow Money Vermont and the Vermont Food Investors? Is that
So the Vermont Food Investors Network is a project of ours, and it's a concrete way for folks to come together to learn about opportunities.
So it's underneath. Okay.
Exactly. It's a project of, and there are kind of some securities laws reasons why it's a distinct thing, but basically with the Food Investors Network, what's important to understand is, and this is true of Slow Money Vermont in general, we are not pooling people's money. People don't put money into Slow Money Vermont and then Slow Money Vermont does not make investments. It's actually an environment where folks can meet each other and learn about opportunities and make their own decisions. Folks mentioned the White River Investment Club. That's a group of folks that are actually putting their money together to make decisions together. That group could engage in the Vermont Food Investors Network as a group. That group could engage in Slow Money Vermont as a group. We're really a catalyst environment that helps people to learn about how, where, and in what ways regular folks can invest in local.
So is that information available online? I mean, where do you have more
So our
details
primary
of the
online
information?
presence is our Facebook page. So facebook.com/Slow Money Vermont with Vermont spelled out.
So that would have more details.
It also helps you be aware of where we are and what we are. So we're here today. We're going to be at Financing the Working Landscape and have a mixer event where local food businesses and local food investors can chat and get to know each other at Sterling College on Saturday the 24th. Next year we're going to do a big showcase event in August in partnership with the Slow Money National nonprofit over at Shelburne Farms, and that's going to again be an opportunity to see and get to know local food businesses and learn about what they're up to. So we do a series of events, sometimes that we sponsor on our own and sometimes that we do in partnership like we're doing today. The Facebook page is the best place to keep up with that, and then you could also, if you write down your email address, we could put you on our email list, and then you get our e-newsletter that talks about various opportunities both for investors and entrepreneurs.
Is it only focused on food?
Well, this is the interesting thing about Slow Money, that the thought is that local food is a great place to get at some of the more fundamental issues. It's inherently place-based. It's a really suitable place to relocalize economic activity, and it helps to hold this metaphor of really nurturing the soil and nurturing the ground of local communities and local economies. So it has chosen to focus on local food businesses in particular. Yeah. Whereas like Business Alliance for a Living Local Economy, the National Valley Network is more broad-based, interested in helping local businesses of all types.
Sorry, I keep asking all these questions.
No, that's fine. That's why we're here.
But is it primarily focused? Not but. I don't know why I said but. Would it do, say, like connecting like a coffee roaster, or is it primarily agricultural, like really like grown here in Vermont? I mean, maybe roasted. I'm thinking like coffee's grown somewhere else, brought here, and then developed, or is it really focused on products that are really made in Vermont?
Well, I think that's a nuance, and I think it's a good conversation. So, in general, like I do a lot of funding of food and working lands businesses in Vermont through the Vermont Working Lands Enterprise Board, and there's a general category of value-added producers, people that are adding value to a product, and different contexts have different ground rules in terms of like how much of the raw ingredients that are going into a product need to be from Vermont in order to qualify for this or that. So I think that that's a decision that folks can make on their own. I think that value-added producers that are adding value to a product in Vermont but are sourcing ingredients from outside of Vermont have a role to play in the broader system. And at the same time, there are businesses like the cheesecakes at Jasper Hill, sellers at Jasper Hill, that they're one of the main reasons that their business exists is because they want to source milk from dairies in their local area and create a sustainable market for them. So I think that that's one of the general questions that anybody has to ask, or what are my values and what are the goals that I'm trying to address through my activities. And so if it's really important to you to support the local farmer, then you might look at a business that is really sourcing or creating new markets for local farmers. If you broadly want to support the local economy, or you see a dynamic entrepreneur that is doing something like coffee roasting that's creating economic activity in Vermont but is sourcing raw ingredients from elsewhere, that's valid too if that matches your values. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about this question about local farmers and farmers markets is that every local food business has to think about what markets am I serving. And wholesale markets, so different from this would be a direct market, a farmer's market. Wholesale markets can be an important part of the portfolio of ways that a local food business earns money. But oftentimes, they might not be producing enough volume or producing consistently enough to sell into a wholesale market. So one of the questions and one of the business opportunities can be ways to aggregate that product from local farmers to put them in a position to access new markets. So I think this question about what markets are food businesses accessing and how can local farmers have access to more markets is a really important question. So for example, one of the businesses that Slow Money partners have put money into in Vermont is Farmers to You. And one of the reasons is because it gets food from local Vermont farmers and it sells them to consumers and families in the Boston area. And it creates this market conduit that is unique, that people are ordering online, they're getting fresh food from a variety of local Vermont farmers, and they're getting it on a regular basis, and that business is creating that opportunity, and one of the things that it's doing is creating a wholesale market for Vermont farmers that they couldn't access on their own. So that expansion of markets and ways to create new opportunities for Vermont farmers is a big part of the thinking that is behind folks that are part of this Vermont community and network. Is that helpful in terms of this question?
Yeah, it does.
Any follow-ups?
No, but while you were talking, I was thinking about another. It's a networking organization. One of the challenges for the White River Investment Club as a new organization is to be able to find sufficient number of investing opportunities. And I assume that Slow Money could provide a network there, because you'd be seeing various opportunities as you talk to other groups and individual businesses, and you could put them together with White River Investment.
Just wanted to capture that other question too. So the Food Investors Network, I think, is a great way for folks like the White River Investment Club to essentially be exposed to deal flow. So if you join that network, then entrepreneurs that are putting detailed information about their businesses into that network, which is then a secure thing that folks give information about in order to be part of and see, so that they're real people and that they're serious about it and they're based here. You then can see these opportunities of different businesses, and that's one of the reasons that the Food Investors Network has been looking at building a partnership with Milk Money, who's also here, because they've been creating an online platform, particularly for this Vermont Small Business Offering Exemption, where a local business can create a way for regular folks to put small amounts of money into a business, and the business can advertise online, which was kind of unheard of before for investment money. So I would say yes, that getting involved in things like the Food Investors Network creates an opportunity to be exposed to that deal flow and know what entrepreneurs are out there, and have taken the steps to put together information that would enable you to assess them.
And does that help with some of the due diligence as well?
Well, due diligence is an interesting challenge. It's essential. It's something often when you have different investors, like you see when institutional investors are working together, they often feel like it's important to do their own due diligence. And so to me, the issue that comes up, because I've been traveling around the state and talking to different folks in different communities about what they're doing already and how Slow Money Vermont can help and relate, that folks are interested in what questions do I need to ask, how do what steps do I need to take to do due diligence and kind of kick the tires on a local food business. So that's really where I'm seeing the opportunity, is to create more education, educational resources and educational gatherings for folks to learn, these are the questions I should be asking if I'm talking with a local food business, or if I'm assessing the level of risk comfort that we have, either as a group or as an individual. And one of the things that's nice, there was somebody here who was previously in North Carolina. There's a Slow Money Network led by Carol Pepe Hewitt there, and she wrote a book about some of their early experiences. And you can see, folks sometimes get excited about investing in a local food business, and they maybe don't ask all the right questions, and it doesn't work out. And so, how do you learn what questions to ask up front and how to assess your own risk tolerance? I think that that's a learning area that is relevant for everyone, and that we want to help to kind of seed.
So is there something you recommend to read or go to learn about
I would look
that?
at Carol Pepe Hewitt's book. I forget the title of it. Here, I'll see if I can.
Carol.
Yeah, Hewitt. Let me just see if I can find the name of this book real quick. Because it just gives that anecdotal, this is what we did and this is what we learned.
Generate what are the values from the understanding of the negative, generate what are the values that we want to see in solar installations.
So the book is called Financing Our Food Shed. And the subtitle is Growing Local Food with Slow Money. And here's how you spell her name. P-E-P-P-E is the middle name.
And it was Financing Our Food Shed Growing.
Yeah, the subtitle is Growing Local Food with Slow Money.
And that's a book that she wrote.
Yeah. But we've learned a lot from the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, and they are really knowledgeable about due diligence and how to think about this, because it is kind of a mindset. And so I think anytime there's an opportunity to spend time in situations like this, like for instance Janice St. Ange's here with the Flexible Capital Fund, she is routinely doing due diligence on businesses, and one of the things that she does is she really focuses on developing and maintaining relationships with the business that they invest in. So it's a much more high-touch approach. You really want to know and keep in touch with that business and know how things are going over time. So when the Flexible Capital Fund invests in a business, they don't necessarily take a board seat, but they will be regularly attending board meetings or other leadership meetings, and they're really keeping up to date and maintaining a strong relationship with that business over time. One of the tools that many of these investors feel like is a really good indicator of robustness in these businesses is if the entrepreneur has put in place an advisory board, because it shows a certain level of maturity that the entrepreneur realizes that they don't know everything and they can't do everything, and so they try to build that board to essentially build to their weaknesses and their blind spots, and have a place to test some of their ideas and to test their learning edge. So, but those are little things that when folks are investing day in and day out, they start to realize this is a good thing to look for, and this is also a good thing to advocate for. Because one of the things that happens is that once you become an investor in a business, you're part of a conversation, and your views are relevant. And so say, hey, have you guys thought about, do you have an advisory board? Have you thought about pulling one together? You might want to look at what John Hamilton has come up with at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund about some kind of ground rules for putting together advisory boards and why they're helpful. So we find that those type of relationship referrals and matchmaking opportunities are one of the most helpful things that we can do to help people, because entrepreneurs or investors don't necessarily know what's out there in terms of how does this work, what should I be looking for, and part of the reason we talk about leveling the playing field is because you can enter into a situation where there's an entrepreneur who's very savvy and the investors are relatively new to the game, or the opposite. You could have an investor who's been in the business forever, investing in companies every day, and you've got an entrepreneur who's actually potentially uncomfortable with having investment money or trying to understand. They don't necessarily know, gosh, do I want equity? Do I want convertible debt? Do I just want a loan? Why would I want a bank loan or not? What would be different about having a loan from an investment club than that would be from having a bank. They may or may not know all that stuff. And so trying to balance that knowledge across the investor community and the entrepreneur community is one of the things we see as really important. Other thoughts or questions that have come up as we've been kind of...
So where do you learn things like that?
Learn things like what?
Well, what you just were talking about, how someone determines what kind of loan investment they get.
Well, this... Where did you see the sheet with the green arrow on it?
Yeah.
You got that? Yeah, so that's a really good starting point because you know what I'm talking about, this capital continuum was on many of the tables. Keep your eyes open for when they're around. They've got like a green arrow in the middle. It's a single sheet. Capital continuum, and Janice probably has more if you don't get one. But the reason that it's helpful, you can take a look at hers for a second, is that it tries to show the range of different kinds of money and what it's for, and the question that she always comes back to, and this is really a good one in any conversation, is if you ask this business, what is your stage of development? Are you just getting started? Do you have markets but you're growing your markets? Are you growing as fast as you can but you need more capital to meet the demand that's already out there? Have you been around for 25 years but you need to really rejuvenate the business in order to address changing market conditions? Understanding that and then thinking about what markets are you selling to, how big are you and how big do you want to get, both in terms of the geographic scale that you're selling to, and also do you have 5 employees? Are you a mom and pop shop? Do you have 50 employees? So different questions about scale. So if you ask about the scale and you ask about the market and you ask about the stage of development, that can help you decide, if we do need money, this would be a better kind of money for us right now, because people don't even know often that there are different kinds of money. They just think we need money and money is money, and it's really not the case. And so what that continuum tries to do is to try to differentiate different types of money and get people thinking about different types of money are better for addressing different kinds of needs. The more you understand where you are as a business, the more better you can assess what your needs are. And then each of those money sources has a different business model. So if a bank is loaning you money at a relatively low interest rate, but they absolutely want you to guarantee you're going to pay it back, so it has to be collateralized with your home or equipment or whatever it would be, that's their business model. And one of the problems that often happens with businesses is they think about they kind of make personality assessments about the bank or the investor based on the terms that they're being offered. And so one thing that's helpful in this educational process is to realize that each of these different kinds of money essentially has a business model, and the way that they act when you talk with them relates to the way that their business model functions with that money, and part of that relates to where they're getting that money from and what the requirements are of the people that are putting in it. So what's nice about these investment clubs and other local groups is that the people putting the money in are community members, and so while there are some constraints about what they can and can't do, to a large degree they can decide what's important to them and what they want to do and how they want to approach things like risk and what terms they want to set. One of the lenders that I find most innovative is they work nationally and they're based in San Francisco, called RSF Social Finance. And one of the things that they do is they have lenders and they have investors that put money into their funds that get lent out. They have a meeting that includes both lenders and investors to set the terms of those loans. And so the investors get to hear about the business and what the business is doing and what challenges they're facing. The businesses get to hear about the needs and interests of those investors, and through that conversation, okay, this is a 3% loan and here's why, this is a 5% loan and here's why. So it's not like there's a black box and somebody just comes to you and says, well, we'll give you this money and these are the terms, take it or leave it. It's really a more dynamic conversation. So that's the type of learning that I think can really help people get a sense of, okay, I understand what this type of money is and I understand why it's relevant, and that sheet gives you a broad range of different types of money with the assumption that each one has a logic to it, and it might be good for certain things, but it might cost a certain amount and there's a reason. And that can help, I think, debunk a little bit some of those I hate all X type of people or I hate all Y type of people in terms of capital providers, and understanding, well, because their business model works this way, this is how they act. And is that right for me based on where my business is or not? Other thoughts or questions that are coming up?
Another 5 minutes.
5 more minutes up? What's of all the things we've talked about, what has felt most important or pressing or interesting or a real need for you guys?
It's all new to me, pretty much, so it's all kind of interesting, everything that I'm learning. And I would like to have my own business, but I don't. And I don't know if I'll get there, but maybe someday. So I'm kind of listening for somebody that I know right now who's looking for investors.
Okay. So from an entrepreneurial perspective.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I don't know this person very well, but I know he's talking to people with a lot of money. But I don't know if he's explored this or not. You know, this type of local investment into his operations. So
That's great.
Yeah.
And then we have somebody who's kind of thinking from the investor side in a community of people that are thinking about putting money into local food businesses.
Right.
Any topics that are continuing to resonate for you?
Well, the whole idea of different kinds of money is really, it's all new to me. And that's one of the things, I'm a member of the White River Investment Club.
Are you a member?
Yeah. And so that comes up as a subject, you know, that's what that money is. And the other question that I asked about, how do we find opportunities to invest? So it's kind of burning questions at the moment.
I've been contemplating joining the White River Investment Club, and I'm a real novice at this point. I want to take the money out of traditional retirement funds, but I also don't want to blow my retirement money. I want to have money for retirement,
Right.
since it's right around the corner.
So there are a couple of questions there. One is, how do you get your money out of those traditional funds
Right. Well,
without taking a bath somehow?
Yeah, well, my husband and I are old enough to take the money out, so that's not so much of an issue. It's a question of how much to take out at one time, tax purposes, per year, putting it in a place that is accessible when we need it. And this is all so new to me. So
Liquidity is important. So you probably want to sit down with Steve Aldrich.
I already have I heard about that through Jerry Ward, and gotten the investment.
Well, let's let you guys take this offline, because I think there's an opportunity to learn. But I think in general terms, some of the things we've heard is, what are the market opportunities and market needs for local food businesses, wholesale and direct markets, and how do they fit together for business sustainability? How can an investment club find opportunities to invest in local food businesses? What about value-added producers? Do you have to be a local farmer? Can you be a coffee roaster? Is that relevant for this work? There are different kinds of money, and how do you learn about them and the logic behind them, and how can that help to kind of demystify the way people act in these markets? We've got folks that are just learning both on the entrepreneur side and on the investment side, and where do you start? How do you learn about due diligence? What questions do you ask? And then how do you avoid blowing your retirement? You know, if you want to get into this, you know, and you're interested and you care, but you can't make yourself unstable in you know, how do you address risk?
Okay, we have 5 more minutes.
That's great. Well, thank you so much.
That came out of the discussions, or any needs that you identified in your group. So, let's start with Eric's group, Slow Money Vermont. Who were the reporters from Slow Money Vermont group? Eric, yeah, you want to do it? Here. Grand Point Check.
Thanks, folks. We had 2 dynamic conversations and covered a bunch of ground. And I have 3 things in terms of questions, because I think these are conversations that are ongoing, and that's how I think about these next steps, is really to continue these conversations and point people towards resources. What's up with local farmers at farmers markets? Can they sustain themselves? What about wholesale market opportunities? How do you support accessing additional markets? How can an investment club, where you've got a group of folks together that want to invest in local food businesses, find opportunities for businesses to invest in? What about a business plan, and how can businesses get help with developing a strong business plan to be credible to investors? What if I'm just learning? How can I get resources about how to assess a business, or to find out what types of money might be relevant for my business? How do I avoid blowing my retirement fund? What questions do I need to ask myself and other businesses to sort things out? Who's going to do the due diligence? Are you going to figure it out for me, or do I need to figure out for myself whether this investment makes sense for me? What is milk money? What is the Vermont Food Investors Network? How are they relevant to this conversation? What about startups? Can startups get money, or is that too risky? Do startups need money? And how can I promote these types of opportunities through my community? And if we've got a group of folks in the community already talking about this, how can we continue that conversation and get more resources?
Great, thank you, Eric. Let's give his group a round of applause. Okay, next up, let's have a report out from the Vermont Food Investors Network. Who are the reporters? Okay, you want to synthesize for us? Great.
It's pretty difficult. We got pretty wonky, but it was fun. We talked about the fact that the money going into this might be considered your Vegas money. It's the fun stuff. And I want to thank Louisa for doing the recording, but she has to run, so she doesn't get to report out. So we had a lot of sort of clarifying questions and answers about how VISBO works, what the distinction is between Vermont Food Investors Network and milk money. And I don't think I can get into any of that right here, but I'm happy to answer questions about that. Important to note that the process, the VISBO process, can be used for all different kinds of capital. It's not just debt or loans or equity. It's the whole spectrum. And so part of what Milk Money and VFIN will do is try to make sure that entrepreneurs are using the right kind of capital when they raise money. Also important to clarify that participants in Milk Money / VFIN will be deciding on their own whether to invest in each particular deal. There's no pooling of money. It's not like an investment club in that regard. And issues that came up included self-directed IRAs or how to access the capital that people have in the retirement funds and still direct them locally, which is a challenging issue. There was consensus that we need a Vermont mutual fund. Anybody has any ideas how to do that?
Great, thanks, Eric. Round of applause. Okay, Jake, your group. Who was the reporter? You want to come up and do it?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
We were really bad at assigning roles and tasks.
Oh no.
Pretty slow. Yeah. So it's funny, Eric. We would like to see a Vermont Mutual Fund as well. We talked a little bit about, or I would say one of the overarching themes at the table in both sessions was the idea of the fact that we all valued keeping savings and keeping wealth in Vermont and being able to do things with it here for the benefit of Vermont, in Vermont, for Vermont. And two of the things that we really thought that we needed to crack the nut on was one, a Vermont-based socially responsible investment mutual fund, and also an asset manager, a clean yield, being that those guys are in the room, a clean yield for investors with less money, so for lower asset, lower wealth stuff, being able to provide financial advisor services, helping with saving for college, things like that. And someone who could help facilitate that, someone who was familiar with self-directed IRAs and could help facilitate all the education that needs to happen around self-directed IRAs and what we can do with our monies if we know how to do it.
Hey, Steve, you want to do it? Who are your reporters? Okay. Have a renegade reporter, that's good.
So we kind of talked about, we had two different topics we talked about. One was what the club did and their role in capitalization in Vermont, and then learned a little bit more about if you want to establish your own club, how do you do that? And basically Steve told us what the steps were for establishing his club. And basically investment clubs like the White River Investment Club is an important part of the capital structure and the capital landscape in Vermont. They fill a niche in which is providing low-cost capital, and they're looking to collaborate with other capital providers who are looking at deals, and then the White River Junction Investment Club can come in with their capital and help make that deal happen. Then we talked a little bit about how the club came to be. It's fairly new. They have yet to make their first investment, but they're already looking at deal flow, getting to know the various businesses that are looking for capital. And right now their goal is to hit $100,000 in order to make their first investment. Looking at keeping about a 10%, maybe 15% cap on each investment. Their ultimate goal is to hit 25 million. So hopefully in a few years, they'll report back and have made a few steps towards that goal. So basically, if you're going to form your own club, like Steve did, you need to establish criteria both for investment. He threw up the slide about the various criteria that he was looking at for the investment, but also criteria for participation. And so they've all signed an operating agreement which details who can participate, how they participate, and I think the biggest part of that is the democracy of the organization, how everybody has a voice in evaluating each deal and whether or not a deal will be made. And also the other thing that came up was that they do seek legal financial advice. They have an advisory board which Eric Becker sits on, and they also have a lawyer who helped them formulate this operating agreement. So it's not a fly-by-the-night little organization. There are some rules and regulations that you need to understand and operate by. So I think that's it.
Thank you. Gwen, your group is up next.
Oh, great.
Gwen's coming up, she has a prop.
Thanks. I just put the URL where you can download that book for free because happily I sold all 3 of the ones that I brought today. I'll be at Woodstock tomorrow for the green drinks there, and I'll have a few more with me there. But
Can you announce the time?
all right, at Woodstock at the Worthy Kitchen tomorrow, we're having green drinks and a discussion. 4:30. With me and Steve, I think.
Yeah.
We'll both be there.
Yeah.
I'll be talking a little more about Vermont dollars, Vermont cents, and my favorite topics, which are non-monetary solutions to our financing problem, which we ended up talking about quite a lot in my group. They were interested in time banks and commercial barter systems and other ways of building economic security and economic health in communities without necessarily always using these financial mechanisms. So we talked about the Onion River Exchange in Montpelier, which is a time bank that has been running since 2007, very successfully, hundreds of members. The commercial barter systems that there are in the world, which include the VIR in Switzerland, and here, if you're a member of VBSR, you have access to a commercial barter system in Vermont. And we talked about how to move your money behind the retirement screens, between IRAs and 401ks and pension plans and 403bs so that you can redirect it into local investment in Vermont. I am not a financial advisor. I'll be really clear about that. But we have some great people in the room who are. I'd recommend talking to Eric Becker and to Jake Ide and to others. He's not a financial advisor either, but he helped Wayne get through the labyrinth of the self-directed IRA that was eventually set up to do local investment in Vermont solar projects. So that was a lot of fun, and again, we'll do more tomorrow at Woodstock, Worthy Kitchen.
And we're going to skip to our Invest in Soil group. And give us your highlights, next steps, and actions.
Okay, I'm Dee Dee Pershhouse, and so some of our points were that degraded soil releases CO2 into the atmosphere. About a third of our current emissions are from soils, and I think, Carl, you said 2/3 of all total emissions over the last 8,000 years.
Significantly more CO2 is going to get here from soil than fossil fuels.
And that soil carbon can be rebuilt. We've seen in Saskatchewan, where the Soil Carbon Coalition's remonitored land, that a square mile of land is drawing down carbon equivalent to the emissions of 300 to 800 people per square mile every year. Soil aggregates, soil aggregate structure, I talked a little bit about that, and how unaggregated soil is like flour and aggregated soil is more like bread. And you can imagine which one water moves into more easily, if you've ever played with flour and water. It doesn't move in. Regenerative grazing, Carl gave a really great overview of that and showed some pictures of land that has gone from desertified land to very lush, back to lush grasslands by mimicking the movement of wild herds using cattle. And various other ways of stopping the leakage of carbon out of soils or drawing carbon back into soils, such as no-till and certain particular kinds of organic farming are managing it, but usually where tillage is involved, it's a bit of a challenge. So, economic benefits we talked about. There's an interesting discussion about whether people need to be, whether we need to set up something where people are being paid for the economic services that restored land is providing, like biodiversity and flood protection and drought protection, or whether the profits from these kinds of farming actually pay the farmer themselves, because we've seen that it's much more profitable. And one of the people in our group was pointing out that back in the 1940s there was lots of writings about that it was more profitable to have good soil, but that's kind of gone the way of Monsanto, those articles. Investment possibilities to support businesses that are doing carbon farming. We talked through some of those. On Wednesday, next Wednesday the 21st, in Hanover, New Hampshire at the Richard Black Center, 4:30 to 6:30, we will have actually 4 of us speaking on a panel called The Wealth of Soils, Economic Benefits of Restoring Land and Drawing Down Carbon, including a woman from Zimbabwe who's helped to restore 200,000 acres there. Monitoring carbon gain and soil health is important to identify leaders in the field. So the Soil Carbon Coalition, that's part of what our goal is to figure out who's actually doing it. There are a lot of people talking about carbon farming or saying, oh, you should do organic farming because it's carbon farming. At the Soil Carbon Coalition, we found that not everybody who thinks they're doing carbon farming is. I think that's it. Thank you.
And last but not least, is there anyone who can come up and talk about the Invest in Solar discussion?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. Okay, you have to keep it to 1 minute. You do it.
Yeah, can you give me an extra couple seconds?
It'll start as soon as you get the microphone.
So first of all, I don't think we have it up here, but we tried to figure out a definition for what community solar is, and I think we could just came to the conclusion that it was really just decentralized energy in terms of how it's financed and what it creates, the amount of kilowatt hours, et cetera, But we found that, community solar, what are the values of it, at least for this area, having respect for the agricultural value of the land. So if you're going to create solar, can put the arrays up so the sheep can go underneath and graze it, so that way you can have that agricultural aesthetic as well as the natural aesthetic of the land. Transparency in terms of the renewable energy credits, making sure those don't get pushed out of state or out of the community. Instead, they're kept in the area. Keep that money local. The economics of it, the returns stay local, and it's locally funded as much as possible. It might not always be possible to get a project all the money in the community, but most of it's from it. And then the goals, energy awareness, making sure people are aware of their energy usage, what their options are for creating energy. That most of it's decentralized, and again, the value-based investment, kind of going back to the divesting from fossil fuels and reinvesting back into sustainable, decentralized energy.
Great job. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Marta and Chris Wood, just to give us some highlights and some takeaways from the day.
Thank you. Thank you, Hillary. I'm not going to reflect on the highlights that I saw walking around because I didn't really sit in long enough. I do want to say, because I think about the big picture on these things, and for me, 30 years ago, almost exactly 30 years ago, I was recruited to organize a conference. And the conference was the first ever conference on socially responsible investing in Vermont. And as a result of that conference, I met a guy named Ryan Freed who was just kicking off clean yield. And at the end of that conference, a bunch of us, I was pulled aside by some others and said, hey, we have to, get together. And out of that specific conference came the Vermont Community Loan Fund. And I've been told that at least the conference was sort of one of also the catalysts, or wasn't as quite as direct as the Community Loan Fund, but the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility emerged shortly thereafter. I only say all this because we have some great ideas developing that are coming up, some that I haven't seen or heard of and I'm very excited about. And there's also an opportunity for new and more creative things to happen. So I encourage everybody to sort of keep in touch. I think Marta's going to talk a little bit about the resources that are available, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a few, I guess, reflections going around a little bit at the table as well. First of all, the very, I would say, concerned, but also ready to act type of energy that I felt here at these tables, because money is very personal, money is very connected to being able to act. And sometimes at other, maybe more environmentally focused discussions, it's really hard to grapple with a lot of the big questions, and there's not much for us sometimes to actually do at an individual level. So here I felt that there was that extra energy that we can put actually to work right away. I was also very grateful that we had discussions on the non-monetary aspects of investments, because Chris and I felt a little bit concerned that maybe that didn't come across so clearly in our panel, or the way we structured the panel, that those are important vehicles as well. So we want to go back to that. I personally connected or resonated with the idea that the system at the moment is very clunky. Many of us have this question of how to move our pension funds, and there is always the big discussion, global versus local, green. So there are different dimensions, different axes, upon which we are evaluating these questions. I recently had the privilege to actually sit in one of Gwen's and Michael Schumann's webinars, where they were taking also questions where they were presenting Vermont dollars, Vermont cents, and I got to ask my complex question, so what do I do? How much money should I move? Should I go global and green versus putting all my money in local investments? And he, of course, he gave me a very complex answer to that question. And it boiled down to move 1% a year, 1% per year of my assets to local, making sure that I have that secured, and over time I move my assets more and more. And another just quick concept that I resonated with was that idea of public return on investment and how we think of ourselves when we evaluate risk. And sometimes if we think of the private return on investment, we really suffer and have a lot of pain making decisions, or pay maybe a little bit more for fossil fuel free portfolios. But then having that, other idea that you're contributing to your community, and therefore your community is getting better, and therefore you're making more money because you're reinvesting. So there is that virtuous cycle that is very powerful. And I'll just sort of stop here with my personal reflections, but I wanted to invite you guys to stay in touch with us. Definitely, I have all the emails from the people who have registered to the Eventbrite. That's easy to do. What we want to do is, after this event, we want to share a link where we're putting all the cool resources that we have all, amounted to with all the people here assembled. And so if you know that we don't have your email, it's either not in the sign-up sheets, or so make sure you have your email, shared with me. So talk to me, and also talk to me if you want to share a resource, because we're going to put it into this link that we're going to share with you all. And of course, I want to thank also Emily Potts from Community Action TV, because she's been here the whole time. Emily will make their recordings available. We also thank Bob Farnham, who was streaming for the first part. Bob, the green guy, was streaming. We had 149 people.
213.
213. So this is just the beginning. Again, we have a lot of catalysts of change here. So let's keep talking. And I'm going to just hand it back over to Hillary, who's going to lead us in the next action.
The final activity, your closure activity, it's a chance to just reflect honestly on what you learned today, how you felt, and what you're going to do next. And those correspond with this weird person I drew up here. So you're going to take sticky notes, which are on your table. Take 3 sticky notes for each person. On the first one, write something you learned. So I might write, I learned that the herding, or how you raise your cattle, can have an effect on carbon in the climate. And I could put that up, come up here and stick it on the head. I might say, how did I feel? I felt like I'm finally reconnected with this conversation. Put that somewhere near the heart, and then down by the feet, write one thing that you will do. So maybe for me, I'm going to bring this conversation back to Marlboro Graduate College and think about how we integrate this with our MBA in sustainability. So that's what I would do. Take your sticky notes, come up here and put them up as you're done, and then feel free to move into socialization. And make sure you check back up and see what people are writing, what echoes with you, what surprises you. And we're done, so thank you so much for coming.